So my name is Jimmy Johnson. Today I'll be talking to you guys about my attempt at automating writing test procedures and turning them directly into TestStand. How many of you are TestStand users in here? Seems like you found the right place. Any of you familiar with hardware and measurement abstraction layers? It's okay if you're not. Okay, we'll be talking a little bit about those. That's not the thrust of the presentation, but that's kind of an enabling technology, so don't worry if you don't. So yeah, it started with this question of, geez, I wish TestStand would write itself. We spend all this time going through and writing our test procedure. It's kind of like TestStand, isn't it? So before I dive into that, give you a couple facts about who I am, where I come from. I'm an engineer at Bloomy Controls. Been there about 4 years. Here we have some facts about us. We've been in the game a while. Our president wrote the LabVIEW style book. So I've been there 4 years. I've been working on, lately, these hardware and measurement abstraction layers in TestStand. And this is one of the cool things, I think, that have kind of come out of that. So here's what a test procedure at Bloomy often looks like. This is our template. I'm sure you all have your own template. We've all seen these sorts of things before. So, you set out, you have some new product or something, and you say, okay, great, we need to test this thing. How are we going to test this thing? What software will we need to test this thing? What hardware will we need to test this thing? And to figure that out, you have to write one of these. So, in this case here, we have some 24-volt device. The first step is we want to power it up. We apply 24 volts to pin J1.1 and J1.2 at a limit of 0.25 amps. And we keep doing this, and these are pages and pages. We have a lot of information here, right? This is kind of pseudocode, almost. It seems like we could get all the way to code here. So that was my thought, but there are a few barriers to that. Start off with, like I said, this is Bloomy's procedure. Does anyone use this? No? Oh, you can't use my thing. Shoot. Everyone has their own format, right? Like, no one agrees on how to do this, and they're all very similar. But that's the first challenge to creating some sort of auto-generating code. So we have to agree on something. That's problem number one. Problem number two, once the requirements are nailed down, we actually have to write the code. That's kind of a pain. And while we're writing the code, sometimes we make errors. Sometimes we just type in the wrong limit. We type in 250 instead of 0.25. And quite often we're listening to someone else who's defining this. So how many people are the product owner that define all the test limits of your tests? We got a couple. Yeah, that happens sometimes. But quite often, someone made this PCB, and they say, we need to test this. And you, as a test engineer, say, okay, what am I testing? Give me my limits. So someone else is filling out that sheet, and then you're transcribing that into TestStand. And there's human error between you and the product owner, and there's transcription error, and it's just kind of slow. So how can we streamline that? How can we go directly from head of test's brain, or product owner's brain, whoever's defining this thing, straight to code? And how can we do this when we're usually writing these documents, which is before we have any software, potentially, and almost always before we have hardware. So here's what I think we can do. First off, we gotta agree on something with a little bit more structure than just a Word document. So this is something I made up. This is not a universal standard. This is just, this is kind of how I would write a test procedure in Excel and then convert it into code. So it looks very similar to that other one. Here, if we're applying 24 volts there in the third step down, we have a step name in the old power rail. We say some comment about it if we like. We have a type, that's a DC power supply output. And we have an alias. So we'll look more in depth. There's more to that chart. But this could be a test procedure, right? We can do this in this format. I think we can all agree that that's a workable thing. And then we can, as long as we agree on this, maybe we can start parsing it out. Reduce our effort, reduce our errors, and then let the person who's defining the test to directly define the code. Have traceability back to them. So if there's goofs, well, it's their goof. Also, as part of this, we can abstract hardware from the code so that if, the hardware team puts together something and we're like, oh, well, I'm not sure we can really do that, those changes don't necessarily feed back into the test plan. We shouldn't have the hardware capabilities driving the test plan. Sometimes that's the way of the world, but ideally, hopefully we find all this, we import it into code, and then the hardware can support it. So, how do we actually do this? Has anyone touched the TestStand API before? Alright, so in LabVIEW, it looks kind of like this. It looks like, well, it's not a LabVIEW, that's just a big old property node. What we're doing here is we're creating a new step. So over here we have some engine reference, and then we have an invoke node, and then we create a step with that, and then we set all of these properties. So these should look familiar to most of us. These are all the TestStand default properties that all TestStand steps have. It's just a property node. It takes some getting used to, but this is how you create TestStand.code. You can do this in C or .NET as well. I'm comfortable in LabVIEW, so this is what I implemented it. At the end, if we want to dig into this a little bit more, we can. I'd be happy to do that. But this is what it looks like. Property node, invoke node, property node. So we're getting through most of our challenges. We have a test procedure that we agreed on. We can turn that into TestStand. We have an API to do so. What steps am I going to insert? I want to power up my UUT with 24 volts, right? I don't know what my rack looks like. I don't know what my ATE is. Am I going to use a Sorensen power supply? Am I going to use a Chroma power supply? What LabVIEW step am I going to call? Kind of stuck here. Unless we can somehow abstract the hardware away. So this is where the hardware and measurement abstraction layers I talked about earlier come in. So what we're looking at right now is a product that Bloomy sells. It's part of the EFT, or Electronics Functional Test Module. This is the hardware access framework. And all that really means is that TestStand does not call code directly. TestStand calls aliases. So what we're looking at right now are signal aliases. At one on the top, 24-volt output. That's the alias of that signal. TestStand calls that, and at runtime looks up the appropriate plugin to call for the power supply that we defined. If that power supply changes, we manage that change in this config file, which is ultimately just a text file. TestStand never knows. At runtime, every time it says, power up 24-volt output, whatever that signal may be. If your hardware changes, you change the config file, it loads a different plugin at runtime. That's the essence of hardware abstraction. But this helps us a lot in this case, right? Now we can say, I know I have a DC power supply output I want to call. I don't know what the hardware people are going to put together, but I know it's going to happen at this point in my TestStand sequence. So we can insert that in right now. We can figure out the hardware later, and then edit this file to match the hardware. We don't even have to know about drivers. They could not exist at all. You get some crazy power supply that no one has ever seen before. Okay, I know it's a power supply. I know it's going to behave the same as every other DC power supply. I can put that step in, let the software people handle that driver, whatever that may be, and plug it in. Any questions on the abstraction layer there? Great. So what this looks like in TestStand, here there's some custom steps that are attached to our EFT. That first one's an analog output. This next one's an analog input numeric limit test. So here we're seeing kind of those same aliases turned into actual code. So this is applying a sensor. We're simulating some sensor for UUT. This is some sort of amplifying UUT. So we simulate a millivolt signal and we expect out some volt signal. So here, if you look up here, we have analog output UUT signals, sensor 1, simulation. We're setting that to 0.1 volts. And we're taking in an analog input to the system. We expect it to be 10. So we're testing our times 100 amplifier without ever worrying about what the hardware is going to do. So, that's all well and good, but can we actually do it? So, to do that, I thought I'd run you through a demo here. So first and foremost, this is kind of the test procedure format that I unilaterally agreed on. It was helpful for me because I was also writing the code to parse it. So here over here, we're defining basically subsequences. You put whatever name you want here for the subsequence of your step. Then you have step name, so 0 volts. You can add a comment if you'd like, and this could be a great place to put a requirements tag if you like, and see it all in a spreadsheet view. And then we have aliases over here, and those are the signal aliases that map directly to that hardware and measurement abstraction layer. And I defined those in this other tab called system definition. All I did here is I looked at all the signals we're going to need to test this UUT. 24 volt measurement, that's going to be an analog input, and then I preliminarily mapped it to some DMM alias. So we have a DMM in the system, I know I'm going to have one of those, I know I'm going to have a power supply. I just mapped it out to what they might be named. We can change it later if we want to. So, all told, we have quite a lot of functionality in here. We're taking analog inputs of voltage and resistance. We're triggering DC power supply outputs. We're triggering connections in any matrices we might have. We have waveform outputs, waveform inputs. So as I select these, there's some kind of contextual Excel magic that helps us out. So if I wanted to change what this was and go to a resistance measurement instead, this type will change. All those both analog outputs. Let's say it's a 24 volt readback. So these very columns are just kind of Excel magic to help out the developer. Tells you what type you define it as and any extra config syntax over there. So if I'm trying to define a waveform output, you'll notice that square wave 100, that gets kind of hairy. So the gray column just kind of helps you define that. Over in these other columns, if we're doing tests, we define what those tests are. These are just standard TestStand, translates directly in. We have our comparison type, in this case less than 0.1, and then we define any units if we want to over there. So this is just standard TestStand, put into a spreadsheet. So if I wanted to make a simplified one of these, come in here, just very simple. We're applying 5 volts to some UUT. This is some amplifier again. And then we test the current, make sure it's not over current. We provide some fake sensor voltage, in this case, 0.5 volt. And then we acquire the output. And on the output, we want to do some test. We want to make sure it's within, the nominal limit is 50 plus or minus 1. So this amplifier, when given 0.5 volt, should spit out 50 volts plus or minus 1. And the current, it's a pretty low current device, it should be 5 milliamps. So if I did my job right here, I should be able to turn this straight into code. And to do that, I have a little LabVIEW helper here. So this is not much to look at, but it's not really a front end. So I've already got the spreadsheet path in there. I have some destination folder, and the output of this is going to be 2 different files. One of which is the TestStand sequence file, the other of which is a test framework file. So that's where we're doing all our abstraction. So if I convert this, let's take a look first at the hardware abstraction file. It'll take just a minute. So, first off we see 3 instruments that I find in that sequence. I had a DAC, I had a DMM, and I had a power supply. And there's nothing filled in here, and that's intentional. We don't know what those are going to be. Attached to those are the signals that we're going to measure or provide. So here we have a 5 volt power supply output, we have a 5 volt power supply readback, amplified output measurement, and a sensor voltage going into the UUT. So what I have to do to get this running is select a driver. So here we have a drop down of drivers that we've already developed. This is a plug-in architecture, so plug in your additional drivers if you'd like. So for DAC, well, let's use DACMX. And I have a simulated device on my computer right now. It's in PXI slot 2. So Similar with the DMM, well, let's use the DMM driver. This is all NI hardware, it makes it pretty easy. Give this an address, big size slot 3. Again, a simulated device. And a driver for my power supply. That's in slot 1. You'll notice populating down here there are some instrument-specific things. So some power supplies need more configuration than others. Here's where you put any addresses, baud rates, that sort of thing. It's dictated by the driver. In this case, these default settings look just fine for what we're doing. It's a 5 volt, so 10 volt max voltage looks fine. So our signals, now that we've defined some sort of instrument for them, any instrument-specific stuff that's related to that populates there. Again, channel 0 looks fine. Let's take a look at this one. It's the readback on the same channel. Channel 0 looks fine. Here's our measurement. We can dictate if we're measuring volts, current, resistance. We're measuring volts in this case, so that looks fine as well. And here we're dictating the analog output channel. Again, analog 0 looks fine. This is all simulated, so whatever. I save this and hop over to our TestStand sequence that was also generated. So here's what that looks like. So if I put this side by side with our Excel sheet, it should look awfully similar. Not that one. So there we go. We have our subsequences. There's setup, call setup, test power, call test power, so on and so forth. If I jump into one of these, like the amplifier test, there are 2 steps in there. Provide sensor output, require UUT, or provide sensor voltage, require UUT input. The cool thing about this, like I can hit go on this, and we'll run through TestStand. I didn't actually do anything in TestStand. So all the hardware specifics were managed by the hardware access framework. We can fill it in whenever. Usually there's several months between what I just did while people build up the rack, and then we can see what we did. But in this case, it's pretty quick because it's all simulated devices. And here we have our TestStand report. And we did our readback here. We measured 5 milliamps on the volt on the dot, so our UT looks good there. And our output here, it's a pretty good amplifier. We got 50.0006, so that's just about on the dot as well. So for me, this opens up some pretty cool doors that are all the way down at the end of the slideshow. So I think this shifts a lot of risk from our job as test engineers to whoever is defining the limits. We can say, fill out this spreadsheet. As long as you fill this spreadsheet out correctly, it will generate accurate code exactly to your limits. And as long as the testing criteria doesn't change, we never actually have to open TestStand if we need to. We can just hit go. Now, this is kind of a fantasy. This is made for a presentation. In reality, I think we all have job security. Some of the TestStand will change. We'll need tweaks. But I think this becomes pretty powerful in subsequences. You can say, I framed out the architecture of your TestStand sequence. I got it on the test system. Fill out these subsequence spreadsheets. Do whatever you want with your product. It will generate code, and it'll pull it in. And again, because of our abstraction layer, we can wait. We can do this from the very start. You can go from your kickoff meeting to code immediately. Hardware can wait. We'll fill it in later. And I think one really cool thing is they don't even have to be coders to fill this out. I think you can take this to your manager and say, this is what we're going to do. I know we're going to do this because it generates straight from this. There's no intermediate step. The requirements stay directly traceable. So in that comment field, I didn't do it here, but you could fill in requirement 1.1.3, have it in a spreadsheet format, check them all off, and then turn that into code. That inserts directly into your TestStand sequence, so you can search that as well. There are some next steps I kind of created this, and I want to leave time at the end here, which I think I've successfully done, for any feedback and questions. I think it's kind of cool, but I'm not quite sure where to go with it. I want to hear what people think, what you can do with it, how you think it might help you. A few next steps that I thought of off the top of my head, maybe a web interface where, TestStand has a barrier to entry. So you can upload a test plan, maybe you can get some sample code and say, oh, this works okay, this is kind of doing what I want it to. Additionally, if you fill that whole thing out, and we're parsing it already, we can make some strong assumptions about what sort of hardware you might need. We have literally every single signal defined that you're going to test. Well then, you need 100 volts on your DMM, it needs to be this resolution. How about a PXI 4065? And if we're really ambitious, we could maybe go the other way and go from TestStand to requirements recapture and say, here are the parameters of all your analog outputs and inputs. Here's a spreadsheet of what it's actually doing. Can you retag this to your requirements? And that's kind of backwards. We all know that we probably shouldn't do that. We all probably have. That could be a fun application as well. So that's what I have for you. I want to leave it open for questions and comments. Take the survey, and there's a badge that I was still put in here as well. So thank you all. Yeah?
Have you thought of doors integration?
I have not. What is your thought?
Well, we catch our requirements in doors.
Yep.
I would still basically, at the moment, I would still need to intermediary step, basically take the requirements out of doors,
Yep.
and basically, and from there, by going, creating this Excel file, and then basically running the script. It's, if you could get some doors integration, which wouldn't need to be necessarily a direct or interface with doors. It's probably easier to do would actually be using a requirements gateway to get it out of doors and then basically getting it from a requirements gateway. So I've done that before, so that is actually fairly simple.
Yeah.
So that way you would basically get this middle step out.
So ultimately, I mean, I've represented kind of a minimum set of required information in that spreadsheet. So I've dealt with people who use doors frequently, but I haven't used it personally. So you may have to add on a little bit to it because I don't think it has like analog input necessarily as
But
a
you can define your columns as you want.
Oh,
so
okay.
basically you can create your those modules to exactly match what you need. So that would be
yeah.
possible.
Yeah, the parsing part of it is really not hard. That's the going from spreadsheet to stuff is like one VI. So it's easily subbable for any other thing that spits out a bunch of strings of stuff.
I generally think of doors as a glorified Excel.
Yeah. In that case, absolutely. Like I said, this is just kind of in the early stages, and I thought this would be a good forum to get feedback like this. So this could really help if it did this, but kind of. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't directly import it. I do import it, but through some changes. So basically, I take Excel language and then turn it into hardware access framework language. So it's going from spreadsheet to spreadsheet with a little bit of changes in the middle. But yes. Right. So what the test engineer ends up doing is kind of what I showed in that little GUI in the hardware access framework is this instrument goes to this signal, this instrument goes to this signal, here are their addresses. That would be what would be left. Yeah.
Do you ever have to do anything with EUT communication where, say, this EUT sets up a little bit different, you have to send different commands to this EUT versus that one, but essentially the measurement is the same? So if so, how do you generate that code?
So I'm not automating that. We have an abstraction layer for communications as well, where you define some message by alias, and the content of that message can change depending on the UUT. I'm not auto-generating that yet. I have kind of a limited set of analog ins, waveform ins, digital ins, kind of the by-wire stuff rather than digital comms. No reason I couldn't, though.
Yeah.
It's just more parsing. Yep.
And at the moment, I think this is tightly integrated with your hardware abstraction.
It is, but you could do it with any hardware abstraction there.
Would you consider possibly abstracting hardware abstraction framework in there so that people could easily adapt it basically to their own frameworks? I mean, it's the thing. It's the one thing. Obviously, I guess the code for this is open source or.
Right now, it's on my laptop.
Oh,
So
but
I have to decide where this lives ultimately. Like I said, it's just kind of an idea that I threw out there.
It's a fantastic idea. I think it has really, really great potential. I mean, it's basically the thing is like if you, for example, would go down the path of like pushing them onto the tools network.
Yeah.
Obviously, and if it's hard integrated into the HAF, people could obviously take the code and adjust it for their own framework.
Right.
Then obviously, once you push then an update, they have the same thing.
Right.
If it was abstracted or something like that, it would give more. Yeah, I don't know.
I like it. You're after my own heart. When you said abstract the abstraction layer, I was like, oh yes. I like it. I do though. I really do.
The thing is, we have our own abstraction layer.
Yes.
So which obviously.
And many people do.
Yeah.
So this is the one that I have free reign of and can use for things like this. But there's no reason it can't be a different one. You do need some abstraction layer, but it doesn't necessarily have to be ours. Any other questions or feedback? I'll be hanging out a bit. Yeah.
Have you thought about also abstracting the execution test? So practically you're creating your testing sequence, right?
Yes.
But then you have to go to test and go to execute whatever single step. Can you actually do that from, let's say, even Excel? Can you do that? You can use the engine to practically run the sequence that you're executing. Because practically what you're doing is you create your sequence.
Yep.
You can actually modify whatever you want in your sequence. And
Yes.
pull
Oh, you mean go back?
really stay true to whatever is in your queue in the first place, or it can be modified.
Yes. So are you?
What I am saying is just to keep it like in the same line that okay,
Mhm.
you did it in Excel, it actually is doing whatever I put there,
Right.
just to run it directly.
So, I'm not sure the utility of that necessarily, because I think it's a rare case that you're just going to run this whole thing and not touch it and run it on your tester. I feel like there's still going to be some human intervention here. This is, for the most part, going to be a starting point. For signal stuff, if you have one signal, yeah, you could probably automate it and then run it. But I think the human is still going to be involved. Yeah. I could be wrong. Right, exactly. That's the idea. Yes?
Does this take into account flow control when you want to do repetitive tests, for example, or different sequences?
It does not currently. It certainly could. So I wrote like a little wrapper around the TestStand API, and I have like the if primitive and the for loop primitive. So it's just more parsing. It could be there. It's not here for the demo. Yes?
I'm mostly, I guess, my interpretation seems like you're serially setting up each of them, and that seems
No, they're set up once at the beginning. So
but like each one, this do that like them.
yes.
My background is in vector test, where it's
Mhm.
synchronization, and then there's the test like overhead, I guess just sort of functional test knowledge.
Yeah, so we do-
Different industry.
Yeah. I definitely come from more of a production test, not semi. Like, you know, it takes 10 minutes straight.
Real time.
Place, yeah, so it's sort of two-dimensional. I think this might be something
It's true. TestStand, you don't want to be handling anything that's time sensitive in TestStand directly. You can call stuff that's time sensitive under the hood, but that returns some result to TestStand and let them handle it. TestStand is not a fast beast. No. So if you needed to write something under the hood that configured 8 instruments this way and then did a bunch of measurements, you potentially could. But yeah, we're kind of in different worlds. All right, I'll be hanging out up here if anyone wants to talk. talk, but thank you all for coming.